Thomas Richardson sat in his corner office on the 23rd floor, reviewing the morning's interview schedule. At 55, he'd built Richardson Industries from the ground up, and he prided himself on personally interviewing candidates for key positions. His assistant had scheduled a 9 o'clock with a woman named Rebecca Chen for the accounting director role, someone with impressive credentials and 15 years of experience. Thomas was a striking man with dark hair graying at the temples, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. His office reflected his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, mahogany furniture, awards lining the walls. But lately the view felt empty. His wife had passed 2 years ago, and his grown children lived across the country. Success, he'd learned, could be a lonely companion. At 9 o'clock sharp, his assistant buzzed. "Mr. Richardson, there's a situation." Before he could respond, his office door opened. But instead of the professional woman he'd expected, a little girl walked in. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Blonde hair pulled into 2 slightly messy pigtails, wearing a pink dress with a gray cardigan that had seen better days. Her shoes were scuffed, and she clutched a worn leather portfolio, far too large for her small hands, against her chest. Her blue eyes were wide but determined. Thomas stood, completely taken aback. "Hello there. Are you lost, sweetheart?" The little girl walked right up to his desk with the seriousness of someone on an important mission. "No, sir. I'm here for my mommy's interview. She's sick, so I came instead." Thomas blinked. In 30 years of business, he'd encountered many unusual situations, but this was entirely new. "Your mommy. You mean Rebecca Chen?" "Yes, sir." The girl nodded solemnly. "I'm Sophie. Sophie Chen. Mommy woke up with a really bad fever this morning. She was crying because she said this job was really, really important. She said we needed it." The child's voice wavered slightly. "So I took the bus here. I brought her papers." Thomas felt his chest tighten. This child had navigated the city alone to get here. "You took the bus by yourself?" "Mommy taught me how. She said I'm very responsible for my age." Sophie lifted her chin proudly, though Thomas could see the uncertainty behind her brave face. He came around the desk and knelt down to her eye level, something he hadn't done in years, not since his own grandchildren were small. "That was very brave, Sophie. But your mother must be so worried about you." "I left her a note," Sophie said, her lower lip trembling now. "I didn't want her to be sad about missing this. She says you're a very important man, and that this job could change everything for us." Thomas's heart, which he'd thought had hardened over years of corporate negotiations and bottom lines, cracked open. He saw in this little girl's eyes something he'd almost forgotten, the pure, uncomplicated love of a child trying to help her parent. "Tell you what," he said gently. "Let's call your mother first, so she knows you're safe. Then you and I will have a chat. Does that sound all right?" Sophie nodded, relief flooding her small face. His assistant helped track down Rebecca's number. When the woman answered, her voice was hoarse with illness and frantic with worry. Thomas assured her that Sophie was safe, that everything was fine, and that she should rest. The gratitude in Rebecca's voice was almost painful to hear. After hanging up, Thomas looked at Sophie, who'd settled into one of his leather chairs, her feet dangling well above the floor. "So, Sophie, you brought your mother's portfolio. Should we take a look?" Sophie carefully opened the folder, pulling out papers with the reverence of someone handling treasure. "Mommy has lots of certificates," she said, struggling with the word. "She's really smart. She works really hard. Sometimes she does work after I go to bed, and I wake up and she's still at the computer." As Sophie talked, Thomas looked through Rebecca's credentials. They were indeed impressive. But more impressive was this child's eloquent testimony to her mother's character. "She sounds like a wonderful mother," Thomas said softly. "She is." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "After Daddy died, she said we had to be brave together. She works 2 jobs now. She's always tired, but she still helps me with my homework and reads me stories. She says things will get better soon." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I just wanted to help make things better." Thomas felt something shift inside him. He thought about his own children, grown now, living their own lives. He remembered when they were small, when love was simple and pure, before business and ambition had consumed so much of his time. His late wife, Margaret, had once told him, "Tom, don't forget that the best measure of a person isn't what they achieve, but how they love." He'd forgotten that. Somewhere along the way, he'd started measuring people only by their resumes, their credentials, their potential value to his company. "Sophie," he said, making a decision that surprised even himself, "I'm going to tell you something. Your mother is hired." The little girl's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really. But not just because of her credentials, though those are excellent. She's hired because she raised a daughter brave enough and loving enough to take a bus across the city to try to help her. That tells me everything I need to know about your mother's character." Sophie burst into tears, the good kind, and before Thomas knew what was happening, she'd thrown her arms around his neck. He held her, this small, brave child, and felt his own eyes grow wet. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. "Call me Mr. Richardson," he said, then paused. "Or you can call me Tom." He personally drove Sophie home in his town car. The neighborhood was modest, the apartment building showing its age. Rebecca answered the door, clearly ill but frantic with worry and relief. When Thomas explained what had happened and that she had the job, the woman actually had to sit down. "I don't understand," she said, her voice thick with fever and emotion. "The interview was conducted by the most honest reference I've ever met," Thomas said, smiling at Sophie. "Your daughter showed me what kind of person you are. The rest is just paperwork." That could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Rebecca became one of Thomas's most valued employees. Her work was meticulous, her integrity unquestionable. But more than that, she and Sophie became part of Thomas's life in a way he hadn't expected. He found himself looking forward to the days when Rebecca brought Sophie to the office after school. The child would do her homework in the break room, and sometimes Thomas would take a break from his meetings to help her with her math or simply talk. Sophie reminded him of what mattered beyond quarterly reports and profit margins. For Rebecca's first Christmas with the company, Thomas gave Sophie a gift, a new leather portfolio, child-sized with her initials embossed in gold. "For when you're old enough for your own important meetings," he told her. Years passed. Thomas stepped back from daily operations, mentoring rather than managing. Rebecca rose through the ranks, eventually becoming CFO, a position she earned through talent and dedication. Sophie grew into a bright, compassionate young woman who volunteered at children's hospitals and talked about becoming a doctor. On the 10th anniversary of that morning, when a little girl had walked into his office, Thomas hosted a small dinner. His children flew in, meeting Rebecca and Sophie, who'd become like extended family. "Dad seems different," his daughter whispered to him during dessert. "Happier. More like he used to be before Mom passed." Thomas watched Sophie laughing with his grandchildren, showing them pictures on her phone. "I learned something important," he said. "I'd spent so long looking at credentials and achievements that I'd forgotten to see people. A brave little girl reminded me that the most important qualifications are often the ones that never show up on a resume." Later, as guests were leaving, Sophie, now 15, gave Thomas a hug. "Thank you for giving my mom a chance that day," she said. "For giving us both a chance." "No, sweetheart," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You saved me from becoming someone I didn't want to be. You reminded me that success without humanity is just emptiness in an expensive suit." That night, alone in his apartment, Thomas looked at a photo on his desk, one his assistant had snapped years ago of him and Sophie reviewing papers together, both of them laughing at something. In her small hands, she'd held that oversized portfolio. In her heart, she'd carried love that changed his life. He'd built an empire, accumulated wealth, achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. But the best decision he'd ever made was seeing beyond the unexpected interruption to the extraordinary love that had walked through his door that autumn morning. Sometimes, Thomas reflected, life's greatest gifts arrive in the most unexpected packages, sometimes in the form of a 5-year-old girl with messy pigtails and a heart full of courage, teaching us that kindness, love, and second chances are worth more than any business deal. And that's a lesson worth more than all the wealth in the world.